All right, let's review monetary policy.
All right, so here's a money market question. Okay, we're going to be given an event and then we're going to have to explain our logic and show in the money market. So here the event is the central bank buys government bonds. So before even thinking about the question, we can just draw the money market in equilibrium, which looks like this. We have the interest rate, quantity of money as our variables. Money supply is this vertical line. It represents the amount of money circulating in the economy, which is decided by the central bank. We have this money demand curve, sometimes called liquidity preference curve, which represents people's demand for money. And that gives us the equilibrium interest rate and equilibrium quantity of money. If the central bank is buying government bonds from the public, what they're doing is they're giving money in exchange for these bonds. And that's going to increase the amount of bills circulating in the economy, which would increase the money supply. So we shift the money supply to the right. We get the new equilibrium. We label the new interest rate and the new quantity of money. And then we just conclude with what happened to the interest rate and quantity of money. We see the equilibrium interest rate decreased and the equilibrium quantity of money increased. Here's another example. If there's a higher GDP and it induces more transactions, once again, we can start by just drawing the money market in equilibrium. And then we need to think, well, how does this affect either the money supply or the money demand? In this case, it's not the central bank that's manipulating the amount of bills in circulation, so it's not the money supply that's changing. What it is doing is it's affecting people's demand for holding bills, okay, or currency. So if there's a higher GDP and it's inducing more transactions, if people want to buy more things, they're going to need to hold more cash on hand. So that's actually going to increase the money demand. So I'll let you figure out the rest. You would shift the money demand curve to the right, label the new equilibrium, and then state what happens to the interest rate and quantity of money.
Suppose they determine that the Canadian economy is operating above its potential. And you have to use the ADAS model to see how this works. So first of all, above potential, what it means is an inflationary gap. So you would draw your GDP market and you will find your equilibrium. The Y level, the GDP level here is the actual. It's a good idea to write it underneath so that you don't confuse it. And then you have to correspond it to an inflationary gap. So the actual level should be more than the potential. So you draw your potential line below the actual, and it's a good idea to write underneath. Sometimes it's called the LRAS, so write that down if that's what you've seen in your classes. Also the AS, sometimes it's called SRAS. Again, that's also the same thing. So suppose the Bank of Canada wants to reduce the gap. What should they do? What kind of policy do they use? So what you have to understand here is that you will have to reduce the aggregate demand so that it shifts to the left, and then the Y would go down toward the potential, right? So policies, fiscal policy, monetary policy, both of them affect the aggregate demand curve always. So that's a good tip to know. What they would have to do is the Bank of Canada would implement a contractionary monetary policy, which means raising the interest rate through the overnight rate, through selling bonds to the people, and that would reduce the money supply. Okay, so because of higher interest rates, there's going to be less borrowing, less consumption, and less investment. That's going to reduce our aggregate expenditure, and aggregate demand is going to shift to the left. So you draw a new demand curve to the left, label everything, you find a new equilibrium, and you're going to see that the price level and the GDP level both drop, which is going to reduce the inflationary gap. Whether it goes all the way back to the potential or not, we don't know that, but at least it's going to reduce the gap.